The Young and the Restless spoilers. Nick had come to Los Angeles quietly, without a public announcement, without the usual fanfare that followed a Newman's arrival anywhere. It wasn't business this time, it was family. Something in his father's tone, something in the way Victor had avoided Noah's name in recent conversations, had told him there was trouble. And so Nick began his own investigation, tracing his son's life across the fractured city, from the art studio near Echo Park to the apartment complex where Sienna lived, to the small private hospital where Mitch Bacall had recently been seen paying visits at odd hours. Nick had learned, through decades of living under Victor's shadow, that when people start moving in silence, they're hiding something explosive. What he uncovered was worse than anything he'd anticipated, a tangled web of lust, betrayal, and vengeance that had grown quietly in the city's sunlit corners until it turned poisonous. Noah had come to Los Angeles trying to reinvent himself, to live away from the pull of the Newman name. There he had fallen into the orbit of Sienna, an older woman, artistic, intense, mysterious, someone who had a daughter and a secretive lover, Mitch. What began as a simple creative friendship between Noah and Sienna grew into something darker, more intimate, more forbidden. Mitch, a manipulative man who hid his corruption behind charm, had treated Sienna like property, his hold over her emotional and financial. He liked control more than affection, and he despised any man who challenged it. When Noah entered the picture, bringing warmth and understanding to Sienna's quiet suffering, Mitch's jealousy ignited. For months, the three of them moved around each other like wounded planets, Sienna trapped, Noah protective, Mitch territorial. But the truth that ultimately detonated their fragile triangle was one that none of them could have imagined. When Sienna's daughter turned 6, Mitch began noticing inconsistencies. The timing of her birth, the lack of resemblance, the nervous silences that followed any question about her early years. Recently, a hospital clerk in Santa Monica made a mistake while updating insurance records and listed Noah Newman as the biological father. Mitch demanded answers, and when Sienna tried to deflect, he forced her hand. She finally confessed what she had been dreading for years. Noah was the real father of the child, conceived during the brief but passionate affair that had taken place when she and Mitch had been temporarily separated. That truth rewrote everything. Mitch's possessiveness twisted into rage, humiliation, and madness. He wasn't just betrayed, he was stripped of identity. The child he'd called his own, the child that made him human, was proof of another man's existence inside his life. From that moment, Mitch became something else, vindictive, obsessive, and dangerous. He began stalking Noah, sending cryptic messages and manipulating his car's maintenance system through one of his company's contacts. Then came the accident. Noah's vehicle spun out of control on Mulholland Drive late one night, and though he survived, the investigation quickly went cold. Mitch had erased every trace of tampering. Yet guilt eats even monsters alive, and in his drunken confessions to a former associate, Mitch admitted that he regretted not finishing the job. Sienna, now living in fear, reached out to the only person powerful enough to protect her and her daughter, Nick. When Nick arrived at her apartment, the desperation in her eyes told him everything. She revealed the truth in fragments, how she had loved Noah, how their relationship had spiraled into something forbidden, how she had lied to protect her child from the chaos of the Newman legacy. She begged him to keep it secret, but also to help, because Mitch had begun circling again, making threats that felt too real. He had already proven what he was capable of, and now, with Noah still recovering, Sienna knew he would try again. Nick's first reaction was disbelief, then fury. The idea that his son had been targeted, that a little girl carrying Newman blood was now in danger, ignited every instinct he had as a father and protector. Sharon, when told, was equally shaken. The thought that Noah's love affair had produced a child she'd never known made her heart twist with sorrow and guilt. But she was pragmatic, what mattered now was survival. Together, Nick and Sharon began to assemble a quiet plan. They contacted Victor's security team under the guise of a business matter, arranged for surveillance on Mitch, and made sure Sienna and her daughter were moved into a safe house under new identities. They didn't tell Victor the full truth yet, because once Victor knew, the situation would escalate into a war. Meanwhile, Mitch spiraled deeper into delusion. In his mind, Noah had stolen his life, his family, his purpose. He began keeping a journal, pages filled with violent fantasies of revenge, detailed plans of how he would finish what he started. He visited bars where he could find information about the Newman family, muttering to anyone who'd listen that the Newmans thought they were untouchable. He called Sienna dozens of times, each message darker than the last, promising that if she didn't return to him, he'd take what mattered most to her. Nick, through his investigation, obtained enough evidence to expose Mitch's crimes, financial fraud, blackmail, even the manipulation of Noah's car system, but he knew the man wouldn't be stopped by arrest alone. Mitch had contacts in law enforcement, enough money to delay any trial, and the kind of obsession that outlives logic. So Nick began setting traps of his own, using Mitch's arrogance against him. He leaked hints through intermediaries that Noah had regained memory of the crash and was prepared to testify. Mitch took the bait, trying to finish the job once more. What followed was a tense game of cat and mouse through Los Angeles's underbelly. Nick's team tracked Mitch's movements while Sharon worked to comfort Sienna and the child, who was too young to understand why her mother woke up screaming some nights. Each day felt like a countdown to something inevitable. Finally, one night, as Mitch attempted to break into the private clinic where Noah was recovering, Nick confronted him face to face. The two men clashed, not just physically but morally, Nick, fighting for family and redemption, Mitch, for twisted pride and possession. When it was over, Mitch was arrested, bloodied but smirking, whispering that none of this would end because truths like theirs never die quietly. In the aftermath, Los Angeles felt different. Sienna's confession had altered the fabric of the Newman family forever. Noah's recovery became not just physical but emotional, learning that he had a daughter, realizing that love had left a permanent mark he hadn't expected. Sharon, torn between anger and compassion, accepted the child as her granddaughter, while Nick stood as the wall between them and the chaos still waiting to resurface. But there were still unanswered questions. Who else knew about the child? How much had Victor suspected? And would Mitch's imprisonment truly be the end, or just the pause before another eruption? For now, Nick and Sharon moved quietly, working behind the scenes to seal every crack. They contacted legal teams, changed documents, secured custody protections, and began planning how to reintroduce Noah's daughter to the world safely. But deep down, Nick knew that the story wasn't finished. Mitch was a man who thrived on vengeance, and men like him always leave shadows behind. Somewhere in a dark corner of Los Angeles, someone else would soon find the remnants of Mitch's journal, and when they did, another chapter of this war would begin. Because in the Newman world, secrets never vanish, they just change hands. Nick's faith in Sienna's confession had hardened into certainty by the time he left her apartment. The details she had given him, dates, locations, names that matched private records, were too specific to be lies. But truth didn't bring comfort. It brought more questions, each one heavier than the last. If Noah truly had a daughter, where was she now? And if Mitch was alive, lurking somewhere in the dark corners of Los Angeles, what chance did that little girl have? Noah remained in a coma, his body a battlefield of bruises and silence. Machines hummed where his laughter used to be. Sharon spent her nights at the clinic, reading to him, praying for any sign of consciousness, while Nick prowled the city in search of the missing pieces. Every lead pointed back to one haunting fact: someone was protecting Sienna's child, and that someone was Holden. Holden was not a name Nick had heard before, but in Los Angeles, everyone had aliases. He was a former soldier turned private contractor, a man whose past was full of half-true rumors and unfinished wars. He'd known Sienna years ago, back when she was still clawing her way out of poverty, and their bond had never completely broken. Some said he was in love with her. Others said he owed her his life. Whatever the truth, Holden had become the silent guardian of her daughter, moving her from one safe house to another, living off the grid, and making sure Mitch could never find her. Nick's search took him through a labyrinth of information, hotel registries, rental agreements under fake names, untraceable calls that vanished mid-ring. With Victor's influence, he could have stormed the city, but this wasn't corporate warfare. This was about keeping a child alive. And for once, Nick didn't want his father's power overshadowing his son's tragedy. He needed to act quietly, without alerting anyone who might use the Newman name as bait. Meanwhile, Mitch had gone to ground. Law enforcement had found traces of him in Ventura, then San Diego, then nothing. Like a snake, he shed identities and slipped through cracks, feeding on obsession and rage. He wanted what he thought was his: control over Sienna, revenge against Noah, and the child that proved his humiliation. The more Nick learned about Mitch, the more monstrous he appeared. He wasn't just a jealous lover or a violent man, he was a predator. He had once been accused of manslaughter in another state, but the charges vanished when a witness disappeared. The pattern was clear: wherever Mitch went, death followed. Nick began piecing together the timeline: Mitch's threats to Sienna, Noah's accident, and the sudden disappearance of Sienna's daughter all lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. It was a campaign of psychological warfare, designed to isolate and terrorize. But Mitch hadn't counted on Nick. He hadn't understood that a Newman-defending family was not a man to be underestimated. Through contacts in private security, Nick traced Holden to a remote property outside Santa Barbara. When he arrived, he didn't announce himself. He simply watched from afar. He saw a small figure playing in the garden, brown curls, Noah's unmistakable eyes. His chest tightened. There she was. His granddaughter. A living fragment of Noah's lost years, a secret the world had almost stolen. Holden emerged moments later, carrying groceries, scanning the perimeter like a soldier who had forgotten how to rest. The two of them moved with the cautious rhythm of people who had learned that safety is never permanent. Nick approached at sunset, hands raised, voice steady but low. Holden recognized him instantly. The Newman face was too famous to mistake. For a long time, neither man spoke. Finally, Holden broke the silence. "You found us," he said, not with fear, but with resignation. He explained that Sienna had begged him to protect the child after the accident. That she didn't trust the police, didn't trust the courts, didn't even trust herself anymore. She had given Holden one instruction: if anything happened to her or Noah, keep the girl hidden until the Newmans could be trusted again. The words cut deep. Trusted again. That meant Sienna had never truly believed Noah's family would forgive her or accept the child. Nick's heart ached at the thought. He promised Holden that no harm would come to them, that Victor's reach could guarantee safety if only they came under his protection. But Holden hesitated. "You don't know Mitch," he said. "He doesn't stop. He doesn't forgive. He hunts." Nick did know. And that was what terrified him most. Back in Los Angeles, Sharon worked with detectives to secure a protective order, though everyone knew a piece of paper wouldn't stop a man like Mitch. Reports surfaced of stolen vehicles near the coast, of a man matching his description seen buying ammunition. Nick increased security around Noah's hospital and arranged for a private jet to be ready at a moment's notice. But time was slipping away. Each day Noah remained unconscious felt like a countdown. At night, Nick would sit beside his son's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, wondering if Noah could hear him. Did he know that his daughter was alive? That the woman he once loved had risked everything to keep her safe? That the man who tried to kill him was still out there, waiting for another chance? Sharon would sometimes whisper that love had to mean forgiveness, but Nick couldn't believe that yet. Not when danger still walked the earth. And somewhere in the distance, Mitch plotted. He had found out that Holden was in contact with someone from the Newman family. He didn't know who yet, but he would. His mind had fractured into something almost superhuman in its cruelty, paranoid, calculating, and driven by a single thought: if he couldn't own his past, he would erase it. He began setting traps of his own, targeting those close to Sienna, spreading misinformation, trying to lure Holden into the open. Nick knew the pattern too well. It was the prelude to violence. He doubled the guards, changed routes, used decoys. But he also knew that running wouldn't be enough forever. Eventually, they would have to confront Mitch head-on. As dawn broke over Los Angeles one morning, Nick made a silent vow. He would find Mitch before Mitch found them. He would bring him down not as a businessman, but as a father, and he would make sure that when Noah finally opened his eyes, his world would be safe. For now, the city held its breath, waiting for the next move. The past had already destroyed enough lives. The question now was whether love, once broken, could protect what it had created, or whether the curse of secrets would claim another generation.